Over the past few months, Riot Games has been under a ton of criticism. Current and former employees have accused the company of fostering a toxic, sexist workplace culture and breaking California labor laws, which all led to a walkout last month, and based on how it went, we're in for a lot more action. Basically, Riot is in hot water, and today, we want to walk you through that and explain how we got here. So, what's going on at Riot? Well, the public side of all this started last year, when Cecilia, a senior reporter at Kotaku, wrote a feature that detailed the sexist culture at Riot Games.
I spoke with about 24 current and former employees at Riot. And Riot is a company that has over 2,500 employees, 80% of whom are men in the initial report. And aside from the simple gender makeup, that's something that might exist at any studio, employees at Riot had issues with hiring and promoting women, men being promoted into positions that women were just as qualified for, but the men might have been friends with the boss. There were issues with regard to listening to women in meetings or interrupting them. There were a lot of issues with regard to speaking in a sexual manner toward female colleagues. For example, like one said that she saw an email chain about what it would be like to penetrate her. Another one said that there was a list that senior leaders were passing around with the hottest women at the company, and someone told that to her as like a compliment.
You have to remember that Rioters are humans, which means that stuff like that, it affects more than just their salary or what job they're doing. It affects their mental health.
It's difficult because women who work at Riot want to work for Riot. They're people who love League of Legends, who love gaming, and for a lot of people, this was a dream job, something they'd always wanted to do. But I had a lot of sources talk to me about how they would go home crying, or they would leave the office and go and cry in their car or hyperventilate because, frankly, the way they were treated drove them a little bit crazy. Imagine if every day you came into work and you had a colleague who was not as good at their job. They had 5 years less experience than you. But, they thought that your bosses humping other male colleagues or, sticking their balls in their face was funny, and that person got promoted and you didn't. That would drive anyone crazy, and it would make anyone want, to question whether they should be at that company or in the games industry at all.
There's a pretty high emotional and mental cost to working in a toxic environment. Being passed up for a promotion for someone less qualified seems innocuous on the surface, but when it keeps happening, it can really fuck you up. And that's before we get to the most disgusting behavior.
One of the things that a lot of sources told me is that a lot of these things weren't overt. I did hear of some instances of sexual predation or assault at Riot, but most of what went on was kind of subtle, sort of microaggressions, things like just talking over women in meetings or a man presenting the same idea as a woman and getting praise for it where, the woman's idea was kind of shot down. And people didn't talk about this. They didn't feel comfortable addressing issues of imbalance in how people treated other people of different genders, which is really interesting because, like I said before, Riot's culture really values feedback and direct feedback when that comes to work and when that comes to performance. But when it comes to kind of cultural stuff along these lines, more sensitive issues, that stuff was kind of swept under the rug.
Now, it wasn't just specific actions taken against women either. Gonzales reported that one person, Riot COO Scott Gelb, was a huge proponent of the generally toxic environment at Riot Games.
A lot of people told me that he was known to fart on employees' faces if women were in meetings. He would hump male employees. He would ball tap people. Super bro culture, kind of like fraternity stuff.
Imagine walking into a meeting and your boss farts in your face or grabs your genitals. It's legitimately awful. I cannot imagine it. The first time you hear about stuff like that happening, you kind of want to laugh because it sounds so ridiculous that it'd be impossible. But if your boss actually did that to you, you'd be living in a nightmare. Now, following Gonzales' articles, Gelb was put on a 2-month leave, but he's still at the company, something a lot of employees allegedly still take issue with. Before we get to that though, there's something interesting that I want to note. In August 2018, Gonzales reported that Mark Merrill got on stage in an apology for Riot's toxic workplace culture and cried. And then Gelb got on stage. And to remind you, that is the guy who was allegedly farting on faces and grabbing genitals. It seemed kind of wild to me personally that there's such a disconnect here. That someone can have such a genuine emotional reaction to a problem at the place they founded and then cede the stage to one of the perpetrators of the issue they feel so badly about. So I asked Anastasio, how does this happen?
Riot, like a lot of tech companies, is very obsessed with the idea, or was very obsessed with the idea, of a meritocracy. So the people who are most deserving should be the most successful and the most rewarded. And nobody would argue that, that's not a great idea in theory. Like, of course, people who work the hardest and are the most talented and contribute the most to the success of the company should reap the rewards of that and receive a lot of praise. What there was no understanding of at the time of reporting the story is why people of some demographics might have a harder time fitting into that ideal or succeeding at the company than others. So, for example, I grew up as a woman, and I was not somebody who was encouraged to play video games. I was not given video games by family members. I was given Barbie dolls. I was not encouraged to play Counter-Strike and talk on Ventrilo with my guy friends, even though I did that. I didn't have Xbox parties. The gaming DNA is woven into the young male experience in a way that it's kind of not for women. And that's not because women don't like video games. It's because this is how games were marketed at that time. And I think Riot was really looking for people who grew up being gamers and, PC master race type people. And if you are somebody who might have come to that more recently and maybe are no less passionate than somebody who had been gaming their whole life, then things would be more difficult for you, and it might be more difficult for you to scale the ladder there.
This mostly brings us up to last month, when several Riot employees walked out of their office in protest. Specifically, they were protesting Riot's policy of using forced binding arbitration in cases that involved sexual harassment or discrimination. What that means is that Riot employees didn't have the right to sue their employer in the case that they experienced sexual harassment or discrimination. Instead, they submitted their case to an arbitrator who made a final judgment, no appeals. And Riot gets to choose the arbitrator. That means that if you experience sexual harassment at Riot, say somebody grabbed your genitals, Riot picks the person who decides what happens, which puts the power squarely on Riot's side. When employees sued Riot for the harassment and discrimination they faced at work, Riot tried to force them into arbitration, which is what kickstarted the walkouts. Now, before the walkouts, Riot did actually make a change to their forced arbitration policy. New employees will be able to opt out of forced arbitration once current litigation is over. That means once Riot deals with all of these lawsuits, presumably in forced arbitration, new employees won't have to deal with all of that. That was really not enough for most rioters, especially those involved in that current litigation, so the walkouts went ahead. According to various reports from the walkouts last month, organizers were demanding an end to forced arbitration, and that many of the people participating in the walkout felt that they were tired of Riot protecting people who were responsible for the very thing they were trying to sue Riot over. Now, we reached out to Riot, and they mostly linked us to a bunch of material that's already been out there for a while, but we should still go over it in the interest of being fair. Shortly after the walkout, Riot put out a statement about what they're doing to answer some of the issues people had with the company. The first thing is the Diversity and Inclusion Rioter Council, a group that Riot wants to form to keep discussions about those topics going in a formal capacity and address the issues that people have with the company. They also have a group of rioters reviewing the code of conduct to help make it more representative of the company as a whole. A lot of this is about mitigating and hopefully preventing the issues that rioters that Anastasio spoke to faced. And that's admirable. There's a lot on Riot's website about what they're trying to do to fix those problems. But there's nothing on that website about ending forced arbitration. The most we got on that specific issue from Riot was this. While we ultimately made the choice not to change our arbitration policy while in active litigation, to give credit to everyone that participated in the walkout, it's important to point out that these changes were directly as a result of what we heard from rioters at the walkout and in the lead up to it. We reached out to the walkout organizers, but unfortunately didn't receive a comment in time for publication. But what we do know from what they said to other outlets is that there will be further action. Speaking to Kotaku, one of the organizers, Indu Reddy, said that they have plans for further action and that retaliation is an ongoing concern. As of Monday, June 10th, Reddy is no longer at Riot. She declined to comment as to why, and we're not going to speculate on that. So, what's next? Well, the Riot walkout saw a lot of support from all over the games industry, and another walkout organizer, Jocelyn Monahan, told The Verge that they have no intention of stopping, and all the support they saw is a big part of what's keeping them going. In my opinion, that's where the fans come in. Look, it's easy to play a video game and forget that it's made by humans. Humans who love making games and love making sure that you have the most fun possible playing them. And every cool moment you've ever had playing League of Legends has been touched, at least in some small way, by one of those people at Riot. And they deserve to feel safe at work.
Anyone should have empathy for the sources I interviewed for this story, and especially sources who faced harassment, unwanted come-ons, and any sort of discrimination. I just want people to think a little bit about how important it is for the people who make video games to represent the people who play them.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit the sub button and ring that notification bell. For unique bite-sized videos you won't find anywhere else, hit up our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages.